everyone who can see? Can everyone who can hear?
Yes.
Feel free to be in the space in whatever way you want to be and what works for you. Sit or lie on the floor, stand, stim, take breaks. There's quiet space outside. There's also a gender-neutral bathroom on this side, as well as a men's room and a women's room on the other side, to your left. And then the gender-accessible bathroom is to your right. If you have any access needs that are not covered here, please let us know. Hello all, and thank you for coming to this event. I'd like to welcome you here today on behalf of the Critical Disability Studies Collective. And with the recognition that the University of Minnesota rests on stolen Dakota land, to keep in mind that we are guests here in this space, which is not our own. I'm Jigna Desai. I'm a member of the Critical Disability Studies Collective and a professor in Gender, Women, Sexuality Studies and Asian American Studies. As a collective, we take disability as central to our identities and lived experiences, but also as a critical analytic for understanding power in the world, and that ableism intersects with other forms of oppression, as well as other forms of justice. This year we're focused on issues of disability justice and care, and we have an intersectional vision that guides us. Our collectivity is grounded in shared visions, respect, labor, and care. We collaborate to bring joy, build community, and hold conversations that are critical to our lives. There are amazing colleagues in critical disability studies who think of each and every detail and caring so we can build a space where we can be together. With that in mind, I don't want to list all of the people, but know that the collective works very hard and want to recognize the labor that goes into building this community. We also collaborated with many people, and we'd like to give you thanks to have this event. And the one at 1 o'clock, there is a Care Web workshop at 1 o'clock in the Crosby room. So please feel free to attend that as well. We give our thanks to the Race, Indigeneity, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Initiative, to the DRC, the Disability Resource Center, the Asian American Studies Program, Creative Writing Program, Department of English, the Department of Gender, Women, Sexuality Studies, Housing and Residential Life, the Institute for Advanced Studies, RIGS, and the Women's Center. And now, because I don't want to spend more time talking and I want you to be able to talk with and hear from Leah, it's my great pleasure to introduce Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha, who's a queer disabled femme writer, organizer, performance artist, and educator. She is fabulous and fierce in ways that I think come across, as you'll see in the work here, in integrating the ways we think about these issues intersectionally. And you can read more of her work, as some of you have, in Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice, but also her other works, which include Dirty River, a queer femme of color dreaming her way home, which was shortlisted for the Lambda and Publishing Triangle Awards. Body Map, which I teach in my class. If you're interested, come take my class in the fall. Love Cake, and Consensual Genocide. She's also co-editor of The Revolution Starts at Home, Confronting Intimate Violence in Activist Communities. And I keep listing these things because I want you to know how rich her kind of, not portfolio, but her intellectual thinking and work is. Their next two books, Tonguebreaker and Exploring Transformative Justice, a Reader, are forthcoming in 2019, so this year. Yes. Wow. So a lead artist with something to fill it. Her writing has been widely published with recent work in PBS, NewsHour, Poets Board Poetry, and the Body Folio, Deaf Poets Society, in Bitch, in Self, Truth Out, and The Body Is Not an Apology. She's a Vona Fellow and holds an MFA from Mills College. She's also a Rust Belt poet, a Sri Lankan with a white mom, a femme over 40, a grassroots intellectual, and a survivor who's hard to kill. Please help me welcome them.
Thanks, Alice. Hi. Thank you, Jigna. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for coming and being here in this kind of sacred 50 minutes or so we have to be together. I was asked, I mean, you were kind of like, you can talk about whatever, and I was like, cool, I love talking about whatever. But I kind of settled on this idea of dreaming disabled of color futures, so dreaming disabled Black, Indigenous, and Brown futures. And as I was preparing for this talk, we're meeting 3 days after Carrie Ann Lucas, who's pictured behind me, who was a disabled, fat, femme, Latinx, warrior, lawyer, mother, lover, queer person, amazing advocate, was murdered by an insurance company. And I'm just going to read a little bit about Carrie Ann's legacy and work, and also her death, and then I'm going to talk about it. And I want to say, first of all, that, and these are all kind of like the foreshadowings, is that this is the second time that somebody whose life makes mine possible, who is disabled and queer and of color, and or of color, has died, and that's how I get to know them. Laura Hershey, who some folks may know the work of, if you don't, please look her up. I have a poem in Body Map where I talk about the fact that she died, and then I saw that she'd like had a Facebook friend request, but I didn't know who she was. And I found out about her through Crip community after her death, and it makes me think a lot about the ways in which ableism steals us from each other and from knowing about each other when we're alive. Both through the isolation we're in, both through the ways in which able-bodied in mainstream media does not listen to or cover disability organizing and lives in community outside the narrow tropes of inspiration and patheticness. And also how, we're all like busy, spoon-daft people, and it's really hard to find each other. But because some of the ways that we are powerful as disabled people is that we are often familiar with death, we cheat death, and we break time, and we are time travelers, I want to talk about her life. And I want to say that, I want to start by quoting her partner and children wrote after her death, the disability community lost one of its fiercest advocates on February 24th, 2019. Carrie Ann Lucas, a disability rights attorney who pioneered is not a word I want to use, to create a new ground in terms of representation for parents with disabilities, died after an arbitrary denial from an insurance company caused a cascade of health problems, exacerbating her disabilities and leading to her premature death. She was 47 years old. And to sum up, because Carrie Ann worked for the state, she had to use state insurance, which was primary ahead of her Medicare and Medicaid. In January of last year, she got a cold, which turned into a trach and lung infection, and her insurance company, United Healthcare, refused to pay for the one specific antibiotic that she knew that actually worked. She had to take a less effective drug, but had a bad reaction to that, which caused a cascade of problems. United Healthcare's attempt to save $2,000 in the initial drug cost ended up costing over $1 million to healthcare and healthcare costs over the past year. It also stole her from us in terms of her family and disability community in general. However, and as I'm saying that, what comes to me is that a lot of people are probably going to hear me saying this, being like, oh my God, it's so sad to be disabled. But I also want to share some juicy nuggets from her vibrant, queer, fat, femme, Latinx disabled life. When Carrie Ann was told that she was not allowed to adopt her second child because she was disabled, she went to law school and created the law in Colorado that enshrines disabled parents' rights to not be separated from our children. As Black disability and deaf organizer Talia Lewis has written recently, around 90% of, I think it was Talia, I might be wrong, I'll double check on that, but around 90%, 80 to 90% of parental separation from children hearings, the parents are disabled, right? And often Black, brown, and poor, right? This is a disability justice issue. When she was locked down to save the Americans with Disability Act in the ACA in a senator's office, when the cops arrested her, she was like, I'm not going to resist arrest, but I'm not going to tell you how to drive my wheelchair. And because it was adaptive and it was a wire, they spent 7 hours trying to figure out how to move her so the protest could keep going. She was a beloved wife to her wife. She adopted 4 disabled kids and loved them fiercely and respected them as disabled youth of color. She had really gorgeous purple hair, and she was a fat femme Latinx icon in Colorado. She ran for city council. She was always out there. And I say this all because in talking about Crip futurity, it's actually really hard to talk about disabled futures when we're still fighting to live a disabled present or know a disabled present. And I'm going gonna click. Let's see if this works. So this is my friend and comrade, Coley Driscoll, who is a disabled Cherokee, Osage, African-American, Irish, two-spirit writer and academic. And these are words I'll read out loud from 10 years ago when Z, myself, and Aurora Levins Morales co-edited a piece, or co-wrote a piece, called Sweet Dark Places about Gloria Anzaldúa and disability. And in it, Z says, it's difficult to call for a radical disability justice analysis when we are only beginning to have anyone acknowledge disability along with other locations of oppression, when we still can't get to the conference or the direct action or the performance, and when we're there we can't stay because of the toxic products people wear, or we can't get inside in the first place, or find that our concerns are simply not present. Or perhaps we don't even try to go because we know that the most basic access will not occur. There will be no ASL interpreters. There will be no transcription of materials. There will be no personal assistance. Our bodies are not even present within the imaginations of a supposedly radical future, right? And so I know a lot of people are like, wah wah, but like, yeah, that's real. And it's real in social justice communities that Alice Wong, who does Disability Visibility Project, and this wonderful online conversation that she just was a part of, speaking back to Eli Clare's work in Brilliant Imperfection, his last book, she said a lot of things, but she was like, yeah, I have so many questions. Why don't abled people listen to disabled people? And I'm like, that's the $1 million question. Do any of you all know? Please tell us. I'm serious. I think that it is, so this is still real, and it's also changing because we change. Right? Coley wrote this 10 years ago. In the 10 years since then, I think that primarily, another question that Alice and Eli both wrote in the conversation I'm referencing, which I will give you the link to and all of that, is like, how do we leverage our power as disabled people in order to dream the future into being? How do we do that specifically as intersectional, disabled, Black, Indigenous, POC, queer, and trans folks? And I think Alice was like, do we always have to speak to the center? Who are we trying to convince? And I think that the thing that is exciting to me is that, it's like, back in the day, I was part of I'll tell this joke anyway, even if maybe it won't scan. I was part of an all queer and trans people of color crazy people's group, which is called Cupocaris, because Icarus is like a big crazy people's group. And we were like, Cupocaris, it's like a dinosaur that only some people can see. And it was our joke, where we're like, you don't see us unless you know where to look, right? I think with disability justice, so much of the time, there's so much, I feel blessed that there's so much work that we're doing. And I know that both things are true, that there's vibrant communities doing intersectional disability justice work everywhere. And because we crip activism and organizing, and we crip Black and brown, queer and trans organizing, and it's hard for people to find. I have cute pictures. So these are t-shirts. You can find them on the internet. A lot of our activism and organizing, I just think it goes back to a saying that I've heard a lot in DJ community, which is to exist is to resist. Billy Rain, who is my friend and my comrade, and one of the many people who are undersung and also beloved heroes of disability justice, who is Arab, genderqueer, a torture survivor, a physically and mentally disabled person who's been doing disability justice work before disability justice was a word. Talks a lot about the places that DJ happen, where he's like, yeah, bring somebody soup, that's activism. Talk on the internet about how to survive and not hate ourselves, that's activism. Create images of our lives, that's activism. It doesn't look like, yes, to the degree to which a lot of people who are not in community know about disability, they think, okay, it's an 8-out protest locking down. It's white guys who are out there doing disability stuff. And then there's all the feminized Black and brown ways that many of us are doing work that is completely off the radar, some of which is in creating images of ourselves. So this may be a leap, but when I saw this on Teespring, and I was like, wow, it is a whole bunch of disabled Black and brown bodies of many kinds of disabilities, right? You've got this bald-headed Black person with a beautiful earring and a cochlear implant. You've got this hijabi-wearing brown-skinned amputee. You've got this person with beautiful skirt in a wheelchair. And you've got this person who's wearing a leg brace, and many other options. And I'm like, this is not something that I saw even 5 years ago in terms of representation. And we're always fighting around, is representation important or is changing the world important? I would say both, and they are dependent on each other, and that when we have this surge of changing what disability looks like that is centering Black and brown bodies, and that is centering the ways in which we talk about disability, often without using the D word, and in which we do organizing, that has huge implications. You all still with me? Great, okay, cool. I didn't even look at my scripts, I'm gonna go back to it one sec. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what it takes to imagine the future. So I've talked a little bit about the present that's harsh, and then I also want to talk about the present that is not harsh, because, hold on, let me find it. Okay, because the things I want to say is that, like, everything's happening, Carrie Ann's dead, and then at the same time, and that we have these difficulties about dreaming the future because we're still pushing to acknowledge the present and to survive the present. And then at the same time, what I also want to offer is that yet here I am at a disability justice present. I'm staying in a house that's accessible, that came to me through disability justice community and healing justice community, where the people who own it moved from an inaccessible space to one with an elevator so their friends could be there. These are all the things I was doing as I was writing this piece. I'm talking to the Disabled People Ask Other Disabled People Facebook group to ask them questions about what's happening with the new hypermobility in my knee, and I'm getting better answers from what we jokingly call Dr. Crip, which is the collective disability knowledge base, than what I got from my shitty Medicaid roomie who told me to take aspirin. I am posting pieces online in different disability communities about the first disability justice library, which is held not in an academic institution, but in a public library in Pittsburgh, led by disabled Black people who wrote, "We're not using the Dewey Decimal System because it doesn't actually have categorizations for us. We're categorizing things so that Audre Lorde's The Cancer Journals can be placed next to on the shelf to Leroy Moore's Black Disability Justice Art History 101, so they can be in conversation with each other. I'm going to take a shower and meet a friend using the cane that my brother, the brilliant disabled Roma artist Lavisha Kormic, painted for me by hand for my 40th birthday, saying, babe, we made it. This is something that's literally a piece of disability justice art that supports me everywhere I go. I'm texting with my partner, who's also a second generation sick and disabled working class femme of color, talking about the awkwardness I feel, even with beloved friends, sleeping till 10 a.m. because of my fatigue, and then saying, I want to kiss you, sleepy. And in that moment, there is a beautiful access, intimacy, and love we have for each other as both people who live with chronic illness and disability. These are all moments of the disabled present that make my life, that I know are the small, huge things. And there's just, my version of it. There's a million ways to have a brilliant disabled life that I know are completely unintelligible and inaccessible and not known to most people. But this is the disability justice present that becomes the future. And I think that one thing that, clearly disability rights folks and white disability studies folks have done a lot of history making, of let's look at the ugly laws, let's look at different moments in disability history. And one quality that I think is really, really key and core to disability justice work, which is work that is led by and centering disabled Black and brown folks, is that I see over and over again that we are hungry to find our ancestors. And for me, I know that way before I had access to disability justice community or could identify as disabled, as a young queer person of color, I was in communities that were really focused around finding our people and finding and re-digging up our buried Black and brown, queer and trans and two-spirit ancestors, and finding the power in really saying that we come from somewhere. We are not an aberration. We are not what our parents may have said sometimes, that, oh, you never would have done this unless we came to this crazy country if we came here. That was my dad. We are people who actually, as it turns out, my dad came out to me as queer when he was drunk when I was 22. We come from a heritage and we're in a lineage pattern, and we get to create and do work out of that lineage, right? So in reaching to figure out the future and doing this wild dreaming, we also reach the past, and there's just one of a number of examples I could throw out, but I want to name Harriet Tubman first and last and always. This is writing that Stacey Milburn did out of the Disabled Young People's Collective, which is a collective of young disabled folks, mostly of color in Fayetteville, North Carolina. They made these really, as one of their forms of activism, they made these like beautiful, like, radical disability justice history bookmarks they gave out to junior high schools and high schools, where they were like Harriet Tubman, Curtis Mayfield, Frida Kahlo, like all these people. And the writing that Stacey and company did then was Harriet Tubman was an abolitionist. She was a disabled black freedom fighter, spy, and military commander who led hundreds of enslaved black people to freedom. When she was 13, and trigger warning for anti-black racist violence, she threw herself between another enslaved person and the overseer who was about to whip him. The overseer hit her and gave her a traumatic brain injury. After she escaped enslavement, she went on secret missions to rescue other black people who were enslaved. Because of her TBI, many people brushed her off as, quote, crazy. She played up her disability so no one would guess she was mapping out paths for people to escape. Sorry, some of the wording is not edited. This was written in 2008. I would choose different language for slaves right now to emphasize personhood. So that's one story, and then building on it a decade later, Saray Jarrell Johnson, one of the members of the Harriet Tubman Collective, which is a collective of black, disabled, and deaf people, activists, organizers. In my book, we were having a conversation, and Saray was like, and we were talking about like the push to make mainstream, not disability-focused black and brown movements get us and remember us and not forget about us and not fuck up. And, Saray was saying, back when Harriet Tubman was on those missions, some of the language I pulled from her life is that she probably had to sit down, rest, take it easy, lie down. Her comrades didn't abandon her then, and we can actually ask our comrades now not to do that, because this is not some new wild shit we made up. We've actually been doing this for centuries, right? And, sorry, I'm gonna get to that in a second. So, and it also makes me want to call in a quote that I go back to a lot from the black science fiction writer Walida Marisha, where she says, she does a lot of work, I don't know if folks have seen Octavia's Brood, but it's an amazing collection that her and Adrienne Brown did of like visionary political science fiction. And Walida said, like, for those of us who come from intergenerational histories of trauma and oppression, we need to remember that we are actually like magic walking around our two legs. Our ancestors dreamed us up and literally bent reality to create us. Which I think is the power of dreaming, whether it's dreaming period, whether it's dreaming as political practice. I would say whether it's dreaming as like a seen as crazy disability justice practice of political imagining. And also as just something where it's like no matter what political time we're in, where we feel we don't have power, that's a wild disability practice to have some like quote unquote crazy wild ass dreams of everything being different, right? And I want, as we reach the future, I want to call on that tradition, and I want us to like reach the past, and I want to reach the future. I'm just getting up my next note here. As I'm doing that, I want to talk. I'm going to say this thing first. There's a quote at the beginning of my book where, if I can do it without dropping it. Okay. Where again about ancestry, Stacey Milburn, amazing disabled Korean wheelchair-using artist and activist who you just saw, said, "I've loved disabled people of color my whole adult life, and I'm still amazed to discover that the more I love our people, the more I remember where we come from. I remember that my ancestors found each other out, seeing each other in the unseen. My ancestors knew that asking after one another and making sure that folks had what they need, what we might today understand as collective access, was the only way to be together. Together, the best shot at staying alive. My ancestors knew the power of vulnerability and how to hold each other in dignity. My ancestors knew joy. My ancestors made mistakes and meditated on who they wanted to be in community, and my ancestors became those people." Right? And I really, if I was to give everybody homework, I would say that I really want to ask people, you don't have to do it now, but I want people to go home and go out of this and really think about, to really start asking that question of like, what are our disabled ancestors? Who are our disabled ancestors? And they can be people who are in our communities or our blood families, and they can also be chosen ancestors, right? Because, I don't know about you, but I have Audre Lorde and I have Leslie Feinberg on my altar, and I ask them for help because I'm like, I know that you went through some shit and you figured this stuff out. And that's a resource we can draw on when we often feel under-resourced and when we're in disabled spaces of being isolated because of ableism and all the other forms of oppression we're against. And I want people to start asking those questions, able-bodied, disabled, and like, hey, maybe you'll figure out you're disabled in the course of this next 20 minutes or next 2 days or next year or whatever. Because I want us to be able to like sit with that work and do that ancestor work and be like, what are the gifts? What's the pain? What's the untold stories? Like, what is the work that's on us to complete or forward? You know, for me, for years, I was very clear, you know, in all spaces, especially in disabled space, that I was like, I wasn't born disabled. I acquired disability when I was 22. It's important for me to talk about the ways in which, you know, I said then I wasn't affected by ableism as a young person. And that's one layer of the onion. And when we're in so much scarcity around talking about disability, period, like, it's hard even to get to that one layer, you know, and to have space for it. And then I'm lucky because I have been able to be in all this disabled intersectional community. And when I dug a little deeper, I was like, oh, wait, right, my mom had polio. My mom had polio, and like a lot of people of her generation who had polio, who were ambulatory, who were walkies, they were really told, okay, you're and she was working class and, you know, a survivor of a lot of abuse, and it was like her ticket to ride was passing, you know, as much as possible. Now, that doesn't mean that she didn't live with impairment and chronic pain, and that, for example, my birth story is one of a lot of medical trauma, which now looking back, I'm like, you're post-polio and you never had competent treatment that was crip-centered. Of course this is why certain things happen. And that's part of the story I inherited, and that's part of the ways in which she knew how to talk about disability growing up, which is very much about some strengths about don't ever tell any doctor anything, don't ever tell them you're depressed, don't ever tell them, you know, you do not trust any systems whatsoever. And also a lot of like pain, shame, grief, and rage around, you know, the story I go back to is when the ADA had just passed and I was 21 and we were going for a very slow walk the way we did a lot of times, and out of nowhere she said, you know, I can't walk more than 100 feet without pain, right? And I was like, no, you've worked 3 jobs my whole life and at the same time and you've never said that. And I was like, and I was a, you know, obnoxious, you know, young person. Not that you're not, but I was an obnoxious young person. And I was like, so I was an activist, capital A. And I was like, are you gonna go and talk to your job and ask for accommodations? And she laughed in my face and she was like, no, they'll fire me for a younger person who doesn't need those things. And that's some disabled history that I'm working in the lineage of to transform and keep forward. And I need to know that, and that is what roots me and what allows me to envision the future. Now, a few other things, and then I'm going to read some poetry, and then we'll have discussion. What I was going to click to, and what I want to go to, is that some of the ways that we imagine different disabled futures, even and especially during times of repression, even when we are just trying, like I know in the last 2 years in disability organizing, so often it feels like we're fighting to keep the ADA and the ACA and all this rights-based stuff that's barely adequate. You know, we're fighting to keep Medicaid, which I'm like, I can't get Medicaid. Like most people I know can't get Medicaid. My friend's like, yeah, I had to prove I had cerebral palsy again. It doesn't really go away. You know, we're fighting to like, but we're in that scarcity. We're just fighting to keep completely inadequate systems as much as we can dream towards. And then you have stuff that's more emergent. Like, so this is from Te Reo Hapai, the language of enrichment, which is a dictionary in the Maori language of indigenous people in Aotearoa in New Zealand, where several years ago, all these folks were like, you know, we had some of these words pre-colonization. And also, it's been a minute since colonization, so like, some disabilities are not things we've seen before, or there's different language for them. And they were like, we want to create new language in Maori for different disabilities. So okay, so their word for autism, Takewatanga, translates to his or her or their own time and space, right? How these words change reality. These are magic spells. Because that is so different than the medical industrial complex's definition of autism, which is this diagnosis which changes every 5 years by these like white cis guys who are able-bodied in lab coats who are not us, who hate us. You know, and then the general definition of disabled is wakana, to have strength, to have ability, otherly abled, enabled. That changes my heart and my life when I hear this. That is so different, and that is so direct. It doesn't mean deficient. It doesn't mean quote unquote broken in the bad way. It is a living word where everyone who's using that word has the potential of being like, disability means otherly enabled. right? It means all of the things that disabled folks have been yelling about like we have all of these different beautiful disabled strengths and gifts. That's reaching back and that's reaching forward, that changes the world. Or, okay, so I actually have a third book coming out this year because I have problems. I do have problems. But I also was like, man, you can't work a regular job. Sometimes you don't have stable income or health insurance, but you can get a lot of shit done in bed if you're just real, whatever. So I'm doing this kids book called Bridge of Flowers where everybody's disabled and Black and South Asian. And so this is a sneak peek. These are the characters. So that's Soraya in the front. She is a witch. And then that's Kamal on the left, and they're a scientist. And they have these two kids, Kumar and Mona. Mona's the hero. They're autistic. That's their favorite cactus. And then they're siblings, an adaptive skater. And so basically, the family's also, like, the parents really love each other, but you can love each other and really not want to live together. So they both live in these accessible tree houses. And Soraya has a really sick lipstick red ramp that wraps around the tree. And then Z has an elevator that's really cool, and there's a bridge that's magic that's made out of really strong disabled vines, and then stuff happens, and they have to fix it. So I was just like, Bear Bergman, who's this guy in Toronto, this white Jewish trans guy who does kids books through Flamingo Rampant, was like, you want to do a kids book? And I'm like, never done it, but sure. And then I was like, yeah, I just want a future that actually looks like my present, where I've been very autistic, stubborn in a brilliant way. And I'm like, I just want to hang out with other disabled Black and brown folks. That's pretty much it. Like, I don't have a tree house. I have an apartment. But I live in Seattle. I'm really lucky to have an apartment at this point with, rent and things like that. But I was just like, when I started dreaming it, I was like, yeah, I want to have, first of all, a kid's book where, like, disability is not a very special episode or, like, a problem to be solved. It's like, everyone's just sick and disabled and has different bodies and hangs out and is wonderful, and we just live beautiful, cribbed out lives, and we have lovers and families that are like that and magic that's like that. And then I was like, that's the future that I want. If I can dream it, I can be it. If I can imagine this, we can baby step it back to happen. And I'm going to check the time because it's probably getting there. Yeah, okay, I'm just going to read a couple more things, and then we will have conversation, dialogue, and stuff. And I have 4 books left in my suitcase, so if you really, I could just throw them at the audience, but that would be bad. Okay, so I am going to go back to this conversation that Alice and Eli had about the future. And they were talking a lot about, the scientists who've used CRISPR to genetically edit us out of existence, and what it means to do disability resistance in times where that's there, and how disheartening that can feel. And, Eli was just like actually referencing, they were like, yeah, Leah asked me this question a year ago where they were like, if you had a magic wand that worked the way it does in the movies, what would you create that's disabled resistance? And Eli was like, he's like, I wrote, we need to end the wholesale medicalization of body minds, remove profit from development and provision of medical technologies, dismantle the concepts of normal and abnormal, create space for well-being, body-mind loss and pain and death to all coexist together. And then he was like, it's a sufficient answer and that's big, but it's actually reactive. And he's like, I don't imagine what might exist in my answer beyond normal and abnormal. My dreaming's mostly reactive. And I'm not trying to be like, I'm smarter than you, like Claire, but like, I was just like, yeah, that alone would be so huge. And it makes me think about, there's this other t-shirt I have that just says the future is accessible. And I was like, oh yeah, I want it, I'm gonna spend money I don't have on this. And then I went to the Disability and Intersectionality Summit, the one that was in Boston this fall. That was an amazing, pretty much like all disabled, Asian and Black, organized cross-disability gathering, and like 40 people were wearing the same t-shirt. We were like, yeah. And I was like, it's interesting because when we imagine it, like, it is radical and rich to just even imagine an accessible future. Like, I'm just like, oh, what would that be like? It's like imagining a future without prisons. Wow, I don't even know where to start. But I was like, wow, no stairs. Or no stairs without adaptation at all. Like, true universal design that also is not dependent on someone having $1 million to do it. Disabled people, and like not like the, respectability politics disabled people being seen as the experts who should like design buildings and futures. The complete end of the medical industrial complex to one that's controlled by us. So now I'm getting away from access and into repair and justice, but going back to access, just thinking about, but they're related, because like, I'm like, okay, if the future is accessible, that means for me as an autistic person that we end the medical violence against autistic and neurodivergent and intellectually and developmentally disabled people, where there's not special ed and then smart people ed. We really fuck up the ideas of smart and stupid. If the future is accessible, this university and every university would look so different. There would be so many different ideas about who makes it and who doesn't, and smartness and stupidity, and what are all the different ways to be, right? And then that leads me to a bigger dreaming where I'm just like, and if the future was disability justice, what would that look like? And I don't have a full answer yet, but I think about, well, there needs to be repair and there needs to be accountability. I think about the need for there to be drawing on like Black brilliant strategies of reparations. Like I think about the idea, I play with the idea and think about the idea of like reparations to those of us who've been harmed by the medical industrial complex, by medical experimentation, by insurance company murder, by institutionalization. I think that before there can be something new, you know, there's truth and reconciliation processes in South Africa and Sri Lanka and a lot of other places, often they're neoliberal, but at their heart there is an idea of like, we testify, we tell the truth, we are compensated, right? And then the new world can come. I want that to happen next. I want there to be those processes. And then out of that, I just imagine a world where like, for real, there is no normal and abnormal, and then we get to see what happens after that when truly we are living the politic that like all bodies are valuable, all bodies are whole and broken and deserve to be here. There's not one right or wrong way to have a body or a mind. And I'm going to end with a poem that is in my new book, Tonguebreaker, which is a collection of poetry, which is out like soon, like kind of now. I don't know how this happens. And if I can find it, hold on. Come back. Hang in there, people. It's a process. Okay, so this is a piece that's in Tonguebreaker called Crip Infinity. And it starts with a quote by the white, poor, crazy writer in Toronto, Miranda Elizabeth, where he says, "If my cane is a limb, then so is my pen." 1. My friend asked her Facebook feed what apocalypse would be too much for us to want to live through. What we would really, really not want to live beyond. People mentioned cannibalism, the end of the whales. I stubborn said nothing. I already died 3 times and came back. I don't fear death. I know her. I trust this world's mean, gorgeous, unrelenting surprise. Like the best top, she's taken me to the edge of death and brought me back, transformed. But if this world was sterile, scrubbed, clean of disabled genius, I would not want to survive that. I would not want to live in a world where my people had been eliminated for our own good. 2. In the infinite, crazy future, I am not eliminated and neither are you. We stand, sit, lie, limp, freak out, infinite. There are kinds of crazy that we don't even have words for yet. We are the walking dead, the dead femmes walking. There's nowhere you can hide from seeing all these birth defects. Oh, you mean people. You mean us. We really are everywhere, puffing, drooling, stimming. The quality of our pain has changed because no shame is the most effective anti-inflammatory. When an autistic kid like me is born, people jump up and down and scream for joy really quietly in our heads. We are so excited to figure out what we can do. The best STEM toys and futures are made by our kind who focused and focused and focused till we made something the most beautiful and people gasped with admiration but never surprise. Nothing horrible happens. You are not taken away. I am not left to die. We take care of each other forever. Our crip femme brown love is something studied in school, how we love towards each other over and over again, how a million ideations couldn't end this. We are an epic love story. We are one of many. All of us are worthy of study and grants, in fact, and I don't mean the able studying us, I mean we study each other. I mean we study ourselves. We check each other out in the mirror. We are the beauty standards. We didn't end. Our wild minds make the future. I not in need of a cure. I have my own amazing future. And yes, I ask, what will we know about the queer disabled body? What do we know about the divine? We know we are persistent like virus and just as holy. Thank you so much. So, I also know every time everyone's like, I don't know what to say. But if people have something they really want to ask, or a question, or a comment, or a thought, or a love note, or you're full of shit, I'd really be into hearing about it. Yeah, in the front.
Thank you. Hi, thanks. Just settle into this chair. Can you talk about how, in material ways, you would have this intersect with the restorative justice work and the IPB work that you have done in the past, and like how, like, not just like talking about it in.
Yeah, I can tell you, I'm doing that work right now. I can tell you exactly how to do it. Don't assume that survivors aren't disabled. See disability everywhere. Look at the ways in which disability is the way that as survivors we're disabled people. See survivorhood when there's complex PTSD as a form of disability. Really disrupt the idea that like, ooh, if you're healed, you're fixed and you don't feel it anymore. Like learn from all of the writing disabled folks have done that like actually there's stuff in between cure and broken that's beautiful. Really, 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 if you're in shelter systems or hotlines or things like that, really make it accessible. Really make it cross-disability accessible. Really make sure everyone gets training on what that is. Really make it so that disabled people can be workers who are doing gender violence work, which includes making room for, you know, like sometimes if you don't start out disabled, you get disabled through doing that work because of vicarious trauma or violence or other things that happen. So like, assume disability is in the room. Like, think about how you crip things, like, you know, like sick leave, right? Like, you know, like support, like things like that. Really listen to disabled genius, so don't just have like one outdated TTY that no one knows how to use. You know, provide training and support that's like paid for, that's not just like, oh, here's more stuff you have to do as a worker. Really, when we're thinking about situations of abuse and disability, go beyond the kind of 101 flyers that are out there that are like, a lot of disabled women are abused, but to really look at how we can cause harm and how we can be harmed. I think that there's a deep need for people, you know, people are already doing this, but for people who, to really look at the ways in which mental health, you know, like, and like neurodivergence comes up in like in abuse stuff, where right now it feels like we're stuck between like, well, you know, they're crazy so they can't be held accountable, to, well, they're crazy so they're a monster, so oh my God, you dated an autistic person, of course they hit you. And there's got to be ways to crip accountability in the center that own who we are and that don't see our disability as a problem, but also look at how it intersects with abuse, if we're survivors or for people who cause harm. I have a piece called Cripping Transformative Justice that's in the book that Ajaris and me are editing that's out next year, where there's 3 sections. One is called Anxious as Fuck and Trying to Make the Revolution, where I'm like, yeah, so everyone doing TJ work is like a survivor with complex trauma. How come we're not talking about it? And so and then it leads into some of the ways in a process I was just in where everyone was disabled, where it took 4 years, but it actually worked, which I gotta say a lot of TJ kind of doesn't. And it was because we kept taking breaks, and it actually allowed the person who caused harm to move from complete denial to being like, oh shit, yeah, I did do that. And we didn't, like a lot of TJ processes are like, go, 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 real hard, 3 weeks, oh God, crash, and then it doesn't finish. And we all were very apologetic, and we're like, oh my God, we're taking too long. And then we were like, wait, no, this actually makes it so that we can do it. And we kept being like, sorry, you know, my chair broke, sorry, I got sick. And then we were like, no, let's flip it. Like, why are we apologizing? Why don't we take for granted this is moving on crib time? And then in the middle, like, I just think that there's stuff around really looking at the ways in which ableism keeps people in abusive relationships, where for so many of us, if there's a lack of care, you know, Peggy Munson's written about this, our, you know, partner who might be doing like care work for us, gets abusive and we don't have another option. And if we don't have another option that's not shitty, we can't leave, right? And that's partnerhood. I also think that in like care collectives, I wrote about this in the book, and like Stacey Milburn in Resistance and Hope, which is Alice Wong's anthology, which is for free. It's at Resistance and Hope, writing by disabled people. It's free on Amazon right now. Fuck Amazon, but it's free, so they don't get money. But she writes about like, in terms of like care, she's like, right, like I've been in care collectives that turn really abusive, that we're all like radical disabled people of color. So really, as we do care, and this is for radical pants people, and it's also for like everyday people who are like, yeah, my grandma's in the nursing home and they're being really shitty. It's really looking at building stronger collectives of care where workers have rights, right, and are paid well or compensated well, and whereas disabled people who need care, we have rights and our autonomy is centered. And that's a huge piece of work. Yeah, that's some of it, and I could go on, but that's a lot of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We have time. Oh, is there a second mic? Oh, excellent.
Okay, this one's not that deep, but I just wanted to know, like, when did you start writing? Was it around the age of 22 or before, after, like?
That's a deep question. So the whole public school system in Massachusetts got defunded in 1983, and my mom hustled me on scholarship into this kind of third-grade prep school because she's like, you're gonna get out, and then I was abused for like 9 years. But they also taught us poetry because they had funding. So in 4th grade, they were like, you're gonna write haikus, and I was like this like neurodivergent, bullied kid. So I was like, writing, great, and I lived in books. So I was dated till there, and I also, I just grew up in the library, that was my safer place, and I was a fucking nerd, and I still am, and this whole thing could have been about Star Trek Discovery, if we want to talk about disabled futures. Okay, Detner for the win, everybody for the win, oh my god. Also, Tilly is autistic, I do not care what anyone says. And they're gonna have a 3-way, okay, sorry, this isn't what you asked, but go watch Star Trek Discovery. Yeah, so I was lucky because I found disabled, I didn't find, they weren't calling themselves disabled, but I found women of color writers. I found Alice Walker and Jean Jordan and, a plethora of other writers, and they helped me both be like, oh, you can write that shit down and not die? Wow. June has that piece called Things I Do in the Dark, and I was like, you can write that? Oh my god, isn't it? And then, I was like, I want to be a writer, and my mom looked like she was going to hit me, and she's like, you need to get health insurance. And I was like, yeah, still working on it. Well, I went to Canada, so everyone had health insurance except for people who are undocumented. And then this is important, so I was a scholarship kid to college, and a lot of scholarship, first-gen kids, there was a lot of you gotta make it. And I was an autistic kid who didn't know I was autistic, so I got away from my abusive family, and so much structure and rules, so no rules, no curfew, one slice of pizza and a pack of cigarettes a day. I stayed up till 6 a.m. and I was fucking up at school, right? I was and I was the kind of autistic that was hyper intelligent, but also kept being they could be how come you can't walk up the stairs like other kids? How come you're weird? So I think it's important to say that with my writing journey, it's a disabled, neurodivergent, queer color journey, because I was a fuck up. I was not Zadie Smith. I went really, a lot of the messages we are handed is that if you're going to be a writer who's successful, you got to hit it really early. And instead, I just had a nervous breakdown at 12, and I got really sick, and I left the country, and I was just oh man, I'm really failing at this writing stuff. So I actually, my first book didn't come out till I was 30, and my first book that really talked about disability, though my early books all talked about survivorhood and, madness and sadness and all the things, was Body Map, and that was just 3 years ago. That was when I was 40, and that's because in the interim, there was a collective disability justice movement created by Black, Asian, white, poor, and brown folks, that allowed, because before that I was I was living disability in my 20s, but I was well, this isn't going to go over the slam. This is just depressing. No one's going to get it. I'm not going to be social capital. So this is a long-ass answer to your question, but I want to say that it takes collective structures to allow cultural work that's Black, that's brown, that's disabled, that's femme, that's queer, that's trans to happen. And I've been a part of doing kind of the scut work of creating those spaces, and also, those spaces allowed me to be able to write my stories, which were all locked up inside me in my 20s. And I feel part of the role of the cultural worker is then to create room for other people to tell their stories. And it's in care work where I'm when I first started being I just want to teach these disabled cutie pop writing workshops at colleges, one person would show up. And then 3 years ago at the Queer Students of Color Conference in Portland, there was a whole room full, and people were like, I want to talk about how my mom has pesticide poisoning from being a farm worker. I want to talk about intergenerational trauma. I want to talk about all these things. I want to really look at intersectional Black-brown disability stories and actually write my own. And so, yeah, like the writing's not, like it's a collective process. And I was gonna give a shout out to, I'm not gonna try and find it here because my phone will be weird, but Google Disability Justice Library Pittsburgh. There are these really amazing activists there who started this DJ library that I mentioned. And the collection of works that are in there are not works that are always taught in really, white-centered disability studies, right? Because they have Audrey, and they have Leroy, and they have all of us, and they have all these different stories, and that's what I want to be a part of, and I'll wrap up there. Do we have to end?
Because it's a
Okay,
class,
fine.
otherwise.
It's a class, okay. You all have been great. I have like 3 books. I'll hang out in the hallway. Thank you so much for being here.
And please remember, there is a 1 o'clock workshop if you're interested in participating in that in the Crosby room downstairs.